Hey guys, it's Scary Story Central. Today we're gonna read Abandoned by Disney. Let's get right into it. Hee hee. Some of you may have heard that the Disney Corporation is responsible for at least one real life ghost town. Disney built a Treasure Island resort in Baker's Bay in the Bahamas. It didn't start as a ghost town. Disney's cruise ship would actually stop at the resort and leave tourists there to relax in luxury. This is a fact. Look it up. Disney blew $30 million on the place. Yes, $30 million. They abandoned it. Disney blamed the shallow waters, too shallow for the ships to safely operate. And there was even a blame cast on workers, saying that since they were from the Bahamas, they were too lazy to work on a regular schedule. That's where the factual nature of their story ends. It wasn't because of sand, and it wasn't obviously because foreigners are lazy. Both are convenient excuses. No, I sincerely doubt those reasons were legitimate. Why don't I buy the official story? Because of Mowgli's Palace. Near the beachside city of Emerald Isle in North Carolina, Disney began construction of Mowgli's Palace in the late 1990s. The concept was a jungle-themed resort with a large, you guessed it, palace in the center of the whole thing. If you're unfamiliar with the character of Mowgli, why would you be? Then you might better remember the story, The Jungle Book. If you haven't seen it anywhere else, you'd know it as the Disney cartoon from decades past. Mowgli is an abandoned child in the jungle, essentially raised by animals and simultaneously threatened, pursued by other animals. Mowgli's palace was a controversial undertaking from the start. Disney bought up a ton of high priced land for the project, and there was actually a scandal surrounding some of the purchases. The local government claimed eminent domain on people's home, then turned around and sold the properties to Disney at one point. A home that had been constructed was immediately condemned with no little explanation. With little to no explanation. The land grabbed by the government was supposedly for some fictional highway project. Knowing full well what was going on, people started calling it Mickey Mouse Highway. Then there was a concept art, a group of stuff search from Disney Co. actually held a city meeting. They intended to sell everyone on how lucrative this project was going to be for everyone. Why do I suck at reading? When they sold the concept art, this gigantic Indian palace surrounded by jungle staffed with men and women in loincloths and tribal gear. Well, suffice to say, everyone flipped their shit. Ooh. You're talking about a large Indian palace, jungle and loincloths, and not only center of relatively wealth area, but also somewhat xenophobic area of the southern USA. It was a questionable mix at that point in history. One member of the crowd tried to storm the stage, but he was quickly subdued by security after he managed to break one of the presentation boards over his knee. Damn! Disney took that community and essentially broke it over its knee as well. The houses were razed, the land was cleared, and there wasn't a damn thing anyone could do or say about it. Local TV and newspapers were against the resort at the beginning, but some insane connection between Disney Media Holdings and local venues came into play, and their options turned on a dime. So, anyways, Treasure Island, the Bahamas, Disney sunk those millions and then split. Same thing with Mowgli's Palace. Construction was complete. Visitors actually stayed at the resort. The surrounding communities were flooded with traffic and the usual annoyances associated with an influx of lost and irate tourists. Then it all just stopped. Disney shut it down and nobody knew what the hell to think. But they were pretty happy about it. Disney's loss was pretty hilarious and wonderful to a large group of folks who didn't want this in the first place. I honestly didn't give the place another thought since hearing it closed down over a decade ago. I maybe live 4 hours from Emerald Isle, so really I only heard the rumblings and didn't experience any of it at first hand. Then I read this article from someone who had explored a Treasure Island resort and posted a whole blog about all the crazy shit he found there. Stuff just left behind, things smashed, defaced, probably ruined by the disgruntled former employees who had lost their job. Hell, the locals from all around probably had a hand in wrecking that place. People there just felt angry about Treasure Island as folks here did about Mowgli's Palace. Plus, there were rumors that Disney has released their aquarium stock to the local waters when they closed, including shark. Who didn't want to take a few swings at some merchandise after that? Well, what I'm getting is at that this blog about Treasure Island got me thinking. Even though the many years had passed since its closing, I figured it might be cool to do some urban exploration at Mowgli's Palace. Take some photos, write about an experience, and probably see if there was anything I could take home as a memento. I'm not going to say I wasted no time in getting there, because honestly, it took me another year after I found that Treasure Island article to get me around to going up to Emerald Isle. Man, I suck at reading. I'm not going to say I wasted no time. I already read that. Over the courses of that year, I did a lot of research on the Palace Resort, or rather, I tried to. Naturally, no official Disney site or resource made any mention of the place that had been scrubbed clean. Even odder, however, was that nobody before myself had apparently thought to blog about the place or even post a photo. None of the local TV or newspaper sites had one word about the place, though that was to be expected since they had all swung Disney's way. They wouldn't be out there lauding their embarrassment. Recently, I learned that corporations can actually ask Google, for example, to remove links from search results, basically for no good reason. Looking back, it's probably that nobody spoke of the resort, but their words were made in. It's probably that no probably not that nobody spoke of the resort, but rather the words were made inaccessible. So in the end, I could barely find the place. All I had to go on was a over the shell map I received in the mail. Back in the 90s, it was a promotional item sent out to the people who had recently been to Disney World. And I guess I have been there in the late 80s. That was recent. I didn't really intend to hang on to it, but it just got stuck in my books and comics from my childhood. I'd only remember it months into my research, and even it took me another few weeks to locate a storage bin my parents had subbed it all into. But I did find it. Locals were no helps, as most were transplants who had moved to the beach in recent years, or old residents who just stared at me when they made rude gestures the second I managed to say, "Where would I find Mowgli's?" The drive took me through an inordinately long corridor of overgrown tropical plants that had run rampant and overpopulated the area mixed with native species for that species or flora that actually belonged there and had tried to reclaim the land. I was in awe when I reached the front gates of the resort. Tremendous, monolithic, monolithic wooden gates whose supports to either side that looked like they must have been cut from giant sequoias. The gate itself had been gouged in several places by woodpeckers and eaten away at the base by burrowing insects. Hanging on the gate was a sheet of metal, some random scrap with hand-painted letters scrawled in black, abandoned by Disney. Clearly the handiwork of some past local or an employee wanted to make some small protest. The gates were open enough to walk through, but not to drive. So grabbing my digital camera and the map whose flip side saw the layout of the resort I set on foot. The inner grounds of the place were just as overgrown as the entryway. Palm trees stood unattended and raged among piles of their own coconuts, banana plants similarly stood in their own stinking bug-riddled refuge. There was this sort of clash between order and chaos. A scarily planted rose or perennial flowers mixed with obnoxious tall weeds and stinking blackened mushrooms. All that remained of any outdoor structures were broken, rotting wood and various charred bits of unidentifiable material. Poop. What was most likely an information booth or an outdoor bar was now simply a pile of assorted debris, chopped up by past vandalism and ravaged by weather. The most interesting thing on the ground was a statue of Balu, the friendly bear from the Jungle Book. We stood in front of a courtyard in front of the main building. He was frozen in a jovial wave towards no one, staring into empty space with a silly toothy grin as Birdsit covered his old swatch of his fur and whined and snared his platform. I approached the main building, the palace, only to find the outside of the building was covered by graffiti where the original paint hadn't peeled and chipped away. The front doors were just open. They had been taken off their hinges and were stolen. Somebody stole the doors. Above the front doors, or the gaping maw where they had been, someone had once again painted abandoned by Disney. I wish I could tell you about all the awesome stuff I saw inside the palace. Forgotten statues, abandoned cash registers, a full-fledged secret society of homeless bombers. But no, the inside of the building was so stark, so bare, that I actually think people had stolen the molding off the walls. Anything that was too big to steal, counters, desks, giant fake trees, they were all resting amid this empty echo chamber that was amplified by every step like a slow rat-a-tat of a machine gun. Rat-a-tat, 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 rat-a-tat. I checked the floor plan and headed to all the locations that might seem in any way interesting. The kitchen was, as you'd imagine, an industrial food prep area with all the appliances and space, no expenses spared. Every glass surface was broken, every door knocked off its hinges, every metal surface kicked and dented. The entire place smelled like very old piss. The huge freezer, not even remotely cool now, had a row upon row of empty self space. Sometimes when I read too much, I become brain dead. Hooks hung from the ceiling, probably for hanging cuts of meat. As I stood inside for a moment, I noticed they were swinging. Each hook swung in a random direction, but their movements were so slow and so small it was almost impossible to see. I figured they had been caused by my footsteps, so stopped one from swinging by clutching it in my fist and carefully letting it go. But within seconds, it started to swing once more. The bathrooms were pretty much in the same state as the rest of the place. And just like Treasure Island Resort, someone had methodically matched each porcelain commode with coconuts and other implements. There were about half an inch of rancid, stinking poop, stagnant water on the floor, so I didn't stay there for very long. What's odd is that the toilets and the sinks and the bidets in the ladies' room, yes, I meant there, all dripped clean or just ran freely. It seemed to me that this would have shut the water off long ago. There were plenty of rooms in the resort, but naturally, I didn't have any time to look through them. All the few I did peer into were similarly wrecked, and I didn't expect to find anything there. I thought there was actually a television or radio in one room, as I quietly heard a quiet conversation coming out, though it was like a whisper, probably my own echoing in the silence, breathing it, or just another case of sound throwing water, playing tricks on me. This is what it sounded like. I didn't believe it. I didn't know that. I didn't know that. Your father told you. I know I know that sounds ridiculous. I'm just telling you what I experienced. Why I thought there might have been somebody running in that room, or worse, some vagrants who had holed up there and probably would have knifed me. At the doors of the palace, I figured I hadn't found anything of note that I wanted to waste a trip up. As I as I looked out the door, I noticed something interesting in the courtyard that I had apparently missed. Apparently missed. Something that would have given me at least one thing to show for all my trouble, even if it was just a photograph. There has a lifelike statue of a python, maybe 80 feet long, coiled up and sunning itself on a pedestal, right in the center of the area. It was almost time for the sun to start setting, so the light fell onto the object in the perfect way for a photograph. I approached the python and snapped a photo. Then I stood on my toes and snapped another. I moved closer again to get the detail of his face. Slowly, casually, the python lifted head, looked directly into my eyes, turned and slithered off the pedestal across the grass. All 80 feet away. It has its head long disappeared into the woods before its tail even left the sunning spot. Disney had released their exotic animals onto the ground. Right there on my floor plan map was the reptile house. I should have known. I'd read about the sharks at Treasure Isle. I should have known they'd done this. I was dumbfounded, just utterly stupefied. My mouth must have been hanging there for the longest time before I came back down to earth and snapped his shut. I blinked a few times and backed away from where the stag hand meant to his palace. Even though he was totally gone, I still wasn't taking any chances and backed my way into the building. It took a few deep breaths and slaps to my own face to get myself in the right in the head up again after that. I looked for a place to sit down as my legs were feeling a bit like jelly at this point. Of course, there was no place to sit down unless I wanted to recline in a broken glass and dead leaf carpet or haul myself upon a desk of questionable liability. I assumed some stairs near the palace's lobby and decided to go have a seat there until I felt better. The staircase was far enough away from the front of the building to be relatively clean, save for starting accumulation of dust. I pulled a wedge of metal onto the wall, again painted with the abandoned by Disney model I'd become accustomed to. I placed the wedge on the stairs and sat on it keep at, to keep at least somewhat clean. The stairway led downwards below ground level. Using my camera flash as some sort of improvised flashlight, I could see the staircase ended. A metal mesh door with a padlock and a sign on the door. A real sign. Read, mascots only. Thank you. This perked up my spirits a little bit for two reasons. One, a mascot only area would have definitely had some interesting stuff back in the day. Two, the padlock was still in place. Nobody had gone down there. Not the vandals, not the looters. Nobody. This was the one place I could actually explore and perhaps find something interesting to photograph or randomly steal. I had come to the palace essentially agreeing with myself that it was okay to take anything I wanted because hey, abandoned. It didn't take much to bust a lock. Well, that's actually wrong. It didn't take much to bust a metal plate on the wall that the padlock was hooked to. Time and decay had done most of the work for me, and I was able to bend the metal plate enough to pull the screws out of the wall. Somebody, nothing else, had apparently thought of or hadn't been able to do it. at the time. The mascot's only area was a startling and very welcome change from the rest of the building I'd seen. For one, every second or every fluorescent light overhead it was illuminated. Even though they flickered and faded randomly, also nothing had been stolen or broken. Even if age and exposure were definitely taking their toll. Tables had notepads and pens, there were clocks, even a punching clock on the wall, complete with filled out time cards. Chairs were scattered around, and it was even a small break room with an old static filled television and long rotted out food and drink on the counter. It was like one of those post apocalyptic movies where everything is left in a state of evacuation. As I walked in the maze like sub basement hallways of the mascot's only area, the sight just became more and more interesting. As I went further, desk and table were knocked over, papers scattered and almost melted with the damp floor, and the larger carpet of mold was slowly overtaking the real rotting crimson floor covering. Everything was just sort of squishy and wood disintegrated into mush, and when I applied even the least amount of force, including items hanging on hooks in one the room simply fell to the most tragic if I tried to unhook them. One thing that annoyed me was that the light was becoming more sparse and unreliable as I went farther into the dank, suffocating depths of the place. Eventually, I reached the black and yellow striped color with the door's character prep one. I stenciled on it. The door wouldn't open at first. I figured this was where the costumes were kept, and I definitely wanted a photograph of that twisted, stinking mess. Try as I might, whatever angle or trick I took, that is until I tripped. The door wouldn't budge. That is until I gave up and started to walk away. That's when there was a slight popping sound and the door creaked open slowly. That is until I gave up and started to walk away. Inside the room, I inside the room was completely dark, pitch black. I used the camera flash to look for a light switch in the wall, but there was nothing. As I made my search, I was jarred out of my sense of excitement by a loud electrical burst. Rows of lights overhead suddenly flashed to life, flickering and fading in and out like the rest I had passed. It took a second for my eyes to adjust, and it seemed like the light was going to keep getting brighter until all the bulbs exploded. But then I thought I would reach that critical change to light dim a bit unsteady. The room was exactly as I pictured. Very yes, Disney costumes hung on the wall, fully put together like a strange cartoon caterwauls hung from the invisible nooses. There was there was there, there was an entire rack of loincloths and native clothes on hangers towards the back. What I found odd, and I wanted a photograph right away, was a Mickey Mouse costume at the center of the room. Unlike the other costumes, it was lying on its back in the center of the floor like a murder victim. The fur on the costume was rotten and thinning, creating dirt patches. What's even odder, however, the color of the costume. It was like a photo negative of the actual Mickey Mouse. Black where he should be white, and white where he should be black. Racist. His normally red overalls were light blue. The site was off-putting enough that I actually put off photographing the thing until last. I took up pictures of the costumes hanging on the wall, upward angles, downward angles, side shots to show an entire row of frozen putrid cartoon faces with some plastic eyes missing. Then I decided to stage a shot, just one of the bedraggled characters' head on the slick grimy floor. I reached at the headpiece of the Donald Duck costume and carefully removed it so the thing wouldn't fall apart in my hand. As I looked into the face of the white iron moldering head, a loud clattering sound made me jump with fright. As I looked down at my feet, and there was my shoes was a human skull. It had fallen out of the mascot head, shattered into pieces at my feet. Only the empty face and lower jaw remained, staring up at me. I dropped the duck head immediately as you expect and moved to the door. As I stood in the doorway, I looked back to the skull on the floor. If you had to take a picture of it, I had to, for any number of reasons that may silly. But if you don't think It's true. I need proof for it happening, especially if Disney was going to somehow make this go away. I had no doubt in my mind right from the start. It was just go negligence. Disney was responsible for this. That's when Mickey Mouse, the photo negative opposite Mickey in the middle of the floor, started to get up. First sitting up, then climbing to its feet. The Mickey Mouse costume or whoever was inside of it, at the center of the room, its fake face staring directly at me as I mumbled no over and over and over, with shaking hands and violently thrashing head and legs that wanted to turn to jelly. I managed to lift the camera and aim it at the opposite creature now is quietly sizing me up. The digital camera screen displayed only that pixels in the shape of the thing. It was perfect silhouette of the Mickey costume. As the camera moved in my unsteady hand, the dead picture spread, mirroring the screen where a Mickey outline. The camera died, went black and quiet and broken. I raised my eyes once again to Mickey Mouse costume. He said, in a hushed, perverted but perfectly executed, executed, executed Mickey Mouse voice. Want to see my head come off? It started to pull its own head off, working its clumsy, glove-clad fingers around its neck with crying, impatient movements similarly to a wounded man trying to pull himself to a tree of a predator's jaws. It worked diligently into it. So much blood, so much chunky yellow blood. I turned away as I heard sickening tear flow and fast. Only care about getting away of the doorway. I saw this final message crawl into the meadow with bone or fingernail. Abandoned by God. I never got the pictures out of the camera. I never wrote the blog entry about it. After I ran from my place, fled for my sanity, if not my very life. I knew what Disney didn't want anyone to know about the play. They didn't want anyone like me getting in. They didn't want anything like that getting out. I don't know why I did this. I'm supposed to be a scary stories channel.